Welcome back, everyone. I am really excited for our guest today. Dr. Alan Barnard is the co-founder and CEO of Goldrat Research Labs, a company built on the intellectual legacy of Dr. Ellie Goldratt, the man who gave the business world the theory of constraints and, frankly, the word bottleneck as we use it in strategy today. Alan was mentored directly by Dr. Goldratt, co-founded the company with him and has since pushed that thinking into territory that I think is going to blow your mind a little bit and maybe even make your head hurt today. Alan, welcome.
Thank you so much, Rick.
Absolutely. So, Alan, tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us some background and kind of lay out the path of what brought you here today.
Sure. I grew up in South Africa without much resources, so very quickly realized that if I wanted to buy anything for myself, I had to become an entrepreneur. Delivered newspapers, worked in gardens. Then I discovered outsourcing. I realized I could hire other kids and be the middleman, build a business that's larger than my own capacity. But I was also encouraged by my grandfather specifically and my dad to, if you want to leave a legacy behind, you have to find some way of being useful to contribute at least one new idea, one new product or service. And I was given a book by my grandfather called The Marquis Who's Who. Basically, an encyclopedia filled with biographies of the most successful people in every field. And he asked me, what am I learning from reading the book? And I said, I noticed that none of these people that came up with these breakthrough inventions in every medical field, physics, science, everything, didn't have good starting conditions. They didn't have ideal starting conditions. They didn't come from wealthy, educated parents, often came from great poverty, sometimes even suffered neglect and abuse, and despite all of that, they succeeded. And I said that to me was, inspiring, is to say that that's not really what's going to make you successful. Of course, good genes help, if you're good looking or highly intelligent, life will be a little bit easier. If you have good luck, it will also be a little bit easier. But at the end of the day, it comes down to hard work, finding something that you're passionate about, being willing to put in the hard work, and being able to make good decisions. And I thought that is my area that I want to work on, is to help people make better, faster decisions when it really, really matters. I very quickly got into technology. I started programming as a kid. I was super excited, as a typical nerd was. My dad brought home this TRS-80 Radio Shack computer, and my older brother was already thinking about goals. My younger brother was too young. I was right in the sweet spot and just absolutely loved this thing and taught myself to program. And how I got connected with AI was, I was about 16 years old and I was doing a vacation work for this insurance company. And basically, the idea was, I don't know if you remember this, but the forefront of technological use then was expert systems, right? From a
Right.
decision making point of view. Go and study the top people in a specific organization or industry. Let them build an expert system, which is essentially a massive network of how they make decisions, if then else. And I was doing this project in insurance, trying to figure out how the top underwriters were making decisions about what premium to charge you for your insurance. So there was the
Okay.
standard protocol for somebody of your age and gender and education level, but the underwriter then had the discretion, had to make judgment about whether to quote the standard rate or to maybe quote more because they're noticing some risk factors, or less. So I
Okay.
started there, and the idea was to build an expert system by interviewing all these people that can then be automated with technology, with computers. And immediately within the first 2 weeks, I was very frustrated because, first of all, there were no universal way of making decisions between people. So everybody had their own idea, but even the same person, when I interviewed them 2 weeks apart, and just as a test, I would say to them, oh, by the way, when you face this decision, how do you make it? They would give me a different rule. And I'm like, what the hell is going on, right? And it turns out that I discovered something that's really interesting is that when you put human beings into environments where there's a lot of complexity, uncertainty, and they have to use their own intuition, subjectivity, not only you get differences between people, but you'll get differences with the same person depending on what time of day, what's going on in their mind, hormones. Have they eaten? Have they not eaten? Did they have a
Mm-hmm.
bad day before? And I was speaking to my mentor at the time and said, how the hell do I solve this problem? And he said to me, there's been some new work in using AI building neural networks. And maybe you can learn from the best and let them help you rather than build an expert system, build a neural network and get the experts to test whether the answer that the neural network is giving is consistent with their intuition and gut. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how I built my first neural network when I was 16 years old. And at the same time, got this tremendously mixed emotions, which I still hold today. The one was excitement, which is you realize that AI does not have any of the limitations that causes people not just to make mistakes when it comes to decision making, but to often repeat it. One of the biggest, most obvious ones is it doesn't have emotions, right? There's no ego attached. It has
Mm-hmm.
no fear of trying many options to see which is the best option. And if it turned out that the option it picked was not the best, it has no emotions to change it like this, right? So it's not just the ability for it to be much, much better, faster, cheaper than us, but it has a major advantage over us in that it doesn't have emotions. I became curious about why did we develop emotions? Because clearly from a decision-making point of view, emotions can cause us to overreact, out of
Mm-hmm.
frustration and anger, but also underreact out of fear, etc. And my speculation at that time was that we probably developed emotions as a hack to decision making. So imagine I put you in an environment. So, Rick, I know you're in construction. A lot of the listeners and viewers will be right in construction, very complex environment. You are asked to, for example, write a proposal on a new project, right? To come up with a quote where you're committing both time and money. And the reality is you will never have all the information that you need to prepare an accurate quote, right? There will always be some level of unknowns. At the same time, you can never predict accurately what will happen, whether resources will be available when you plan them to be available, whether the customer will change their mind. And yet you have to make a decision about whether to accept this project, and you have to make a decision about what to quote on this project, right? How do you practically do that? And I think evolution came up with a hack. It said, imagine you have to pick a partner out of many partners. There are so many things you can consider. You'll never know everything about them. You can never predict how they will turn out. How do you do it? What if there was just one criteria? How does it make you feel?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That decision, that person, that opportunity triggers both positive and a negative emotion. And the one that wins out is the one that you go for. So that to me was fascinating, is to understand when we as human beings are put into conditions where there's lots of uncertainty, it requires intuition and subjectivity, we use emotions as a hack. And my prediction was at that stage, this is going back now almost 40 years ago, right? I'm 56 this year. So, yeah, literally 40 years ago. I predicted that if you are giving AI the same type of decisions, that it will unavoidably develop emotions in order to make decisions, right? So
Yeah.
I got inspired by the fact that AI is so much better. At the same time, I got a little bit depressed, realizing that we can never outperform it, right? If it
Mm-hmm.
has the ability that when required, it will develop emotions and consciousness because it's just a practical way of making these highly complex decisions, I thought we are screwed. So that's kind of a short version of my whole, 40 years of background into AI. Since then, I've worked on many projects where we use AI. As you know, during our preparation call, we also
Hmm.
build digital twins, because if AI comes up with a new way of doing something, maybe preparing a quotation, how do I know it's actually better? I want to be able to compare it with the current way that we're doing it and run a simulation with both rules and see which one performs the best under real world conditions.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's the fascinating thing about this is, I mean, you talk about having emotion involved in making some of these highly subjective decisions. Wouldn't some of the constraints of AI, if it didn't have any type of emotion, it wouldn't make a decision
No,
because there
this
isn't
is,
a perfect decision.
yeah, this is a great point. So people have talked a lot about hallucinations, right?
Mm,
So hallucination is not just common in AI, it's common with human beings. It's basically the ability to confidently make a decision, give an answer when you don't have all the facts, all the
mhm,
information, and you can't predict accurately. In the
mhm,
same way, if you ask somebody, what do you think about this person, right? They have a strong opinion and they are equally confident whether they're right or wrong, right? That's a hallucination.
mhm, mhm,
In the same, I remember the first time I was playing around with ChatGPT and I said, can you please write a bio for me? And it prepared this beautiful bio that said I had studied at Stanford and Cambridge. And I'm like, dude, I never went to Stanford and Cambridge. And it came back and it apologized, of course, very sincerely. And it said, I just thought that since you are known to be one of the top experts in the world, I assumed you must have gone to Stanford. But
mhm,
that's hallucination, right? So you are confidently giving an answer or you're confidently making a decision when really you don't have all the information and knowledge to make it. And
mhm,
because it's subjective, so imagine you felt the emotion of being overwhelmed, right? So imagine ChatGPT, if you asked it a question and it came back and said, sorry, Rick, I don't know. Or sorry, Rick, there's a lot
mhm,
of ways of doing it. I don't feel confident enough to tell you which is best for you, right? If it was truthful, that would be the answer, right?
right.
And we know what that means is from a decision perspective, that's the main reason why we procrastinate, is we're
Okay.
scared to get
Mhm,
it wrong.
mhm,
And the best way not to get it wrong intuitively is don't make a decision. So, so if you force AI and people to make a decision, they would hallucinate, right?
sure.
That's guaranteed. Now, imagine if we were able to block AI from hallucinating. What would happen then? We are then forcing it to say, listen, you have asked me a question. I'm not an expert in it. I haven't built up the 30 years of experience, right? Let me research first, and then I'll come back to you. This is what we've seen now with the new versions of AI, right? In order to have an alternative to hallucination, which programmatically you can stop it from doing it, right? You can ask it, how confident are you on a scale of 1 to 10 that you are
Mhm,
right? And
mhm,
if you are very confident, how could you check whether you should be confident, right? So in
right.
my case, it assumed I studied at Stanford and it gave that answer very confidently. And when I asked it, how confident are you? It said 9 out of 10. So it
Wow.
introduces some uncertainty. Then I said, how could you
Some.
check it? Do you think it might be on my LinkedIn profile if I went to Stanford? Probably. Let me go and
Mm,
check. It's
mm,
not there. So either you didn't put it or you never went to Stanford. And that's what deep research does, is if we stop the thing from hallucinating, it has to think more. It has to reason, go and check what's available. Can it test it? And if it can't come up with information that gives it that certainty and you've stopped it from hallucinating, it will come back very honestly and say, listen, Rick, I'm not sure what to do in your case, but here's your options. And if it was up to me, this is the option I would pick, and this is why.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's how we've gone from Chat GPT, right, which is just giving you an answer, always giving you an answer, never hesitating, to
Always.
more the kind of the co-worker, you know, agentry AI that says, let me pause, I'm not confident, let me do the research and then come back and share with you that uncertainty, but also still give you an option, right? Because I don't want to imagine ChatGPT came back and said, I have no idea. What the hell do you mean?
What?
I have to make a decision. I have to prepare this quote for this company, tomorrow they're expecting me to submit a proposal. How much should I quote? And ChatGPT goes, sorry, I have no idea.
I don't know. Yeah, fresh out of ideas.
Compared to coming back and say, listen, I tend to think in terms of buckets, right? So this is either a 1 million, a 5 million, or $10 million project. I suspect it's more like a 1 million 6 months project. And here's how I would think about it. Here's some practical. So if you answer these questions, I can tell you is it 1.5 or maybe 0.5 million. And that's
Mhm.
how we actually want it as a thinking partner.
I know just from my own experience when I've asked ChatGPT and Claude, when it's an open-ended question, I say be realistic, or even sometimes I'll say be pessimistic and give me the answer. And
Yeah.
it's amazing how different those answers can be just just by throwing in those prompts.
Yeah. And it's very interesting. It impacts all of us. So I was working with a medical doctor that's studying her specialty as birth control. And it's a very interesting thing. What the data has shown for a lot of years that has never really been published because I worried about the potential negative consequences is that when a woman is on birth control, she makes very different decisions, especially when it comes to selecting a romantic partner than when
Yeah.
she's not on birth control. When she's on birth control, she has a bias towards finding the safest person that can look after her because birth control basically fools the mind that you're pregnant, even
Yeah.
though you're not, right? So when you're pregnant, what's most important is somebody that can protect you and provide you with enough,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they
Right.
tend to select people like the men in their life, their father, their brother, etc. Very safe. And often those relationships don't work out, right? If they're off birth control, they will tend to go for one that they are very attracted to, that's alpha male, where they have what appears to be good genes. They're very well built,
Right.
very athletic, or very intelligent. So it's
Mm-hmm.
very interesting. Just that small thing, right? Whether you take birth control or not, has got a massive impact on decision making. And
Yeah.
that takes further, right? There's this
Oh, yeah.
foundational link between our mind and our body of not just what we are eating, the drugs that we are taking, but even the thoughts that we have, what we
Mm-hmm.
believe in, has a dramatic impact on our decision making. Now, AI doesn't have that.
Right.
Sometimes it's helpful. If it is helpful, my speculation is that it will develop it. Right? That's just what the
Yeah.
essence of evolution is. Try a bunch of
Sure.
stuff and keep what's helpful, right?
Right.
If it's
Right.
not helpful, it will not develop it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. That is excellent stuff. And now that we've got off into that tangent, let's get back to some of the questions I've got for you.
Sure.
More around, of course, we want to get into your digital twin idea.
Yeah.
But first, I want to ask you. So most people encounter theory of constraints through Dr. Goldrat's book, The Goal, and they walk away understanding the idea of a bottleneck. But you were mentored by Dr. Goldrat himself. What did you learn from him directly that you can't get from that book?
So he shared with me words that inspire and haunt me every day. The first time I met him and the last time I spoke to him just shortly before he passed away. He said, Alan, do not dare stand in my shadow, stand on my shoulders. I expect you to see further. So the book, The Goal, introduces this very simple analogy that says, think about your company, even think about your life as a chain. And if you want to make that chain stronger, you want to improve it, go and look for the weakest link. There could be many weak links, but
Hmm.
there's always only one weakest link. And that's true whether your chain has got 3 links, you're a simple, small company, or it's got 30,000 links, right? It's a profound insight. Where I took that a step further was, what if the goal is not to do more, to make the system stronger? So I expanded it to cover 5 goals, not just one. Do more, faster, better, cheaper, simpler. And each one of those goals have a different type of constraint, the thing that limits me from achieving more of that performance dimension, right? So if I was working with you and I said, Rick, what's your goal? And you say, I don't know, I have many goals. I said, are you meeting the demand that's being placed on you? If you say no, because you have a backlog of orders, I said, great. The focus is going to be do more, find the weakest link, find the bottleneck. If you tell me, listen,
Hmm.
I'm already meeting the demand, we are keeping up with the demand, I'm in construction, right? We're meeting the demand for the number of houses that we are building, but we're just not doing it fast enough. It's taking us 12 months to do the project, and we'd like to do it in 6 months. So then the goal is do it faster. So the idea of a constraint, the one link that I should focus on should be focus on the longest link in that chain, not the weakest. Make that one shorter. Then go to the second longest, make that one shorter. That's how you go faster, right? If you tell me I'm already meeting the demand and we're doing it fast enough, but just not good enough, the quality is not good or the reliability is not good, then rather than look for the weakest or the longest link, I'm looking for the faultiest link in my system and focus my limited resources on improving that. And it could be that I'm meeting the demand within the tolerance time of customers, within their quality expectations, but I'm just not doing it cheap enough. Then I should find the heaviest link or the costliest link in my system. And the final goal could be that over time, complexity grows. I'm adding more products, more services, getting more people. From time to time, I need to just like reboot. Elon Musk calls this undesign. Says a common mistake that he's made and other people have made is they start improving or optimizing before they even check, are all these steps really necessary, right?
Hmm.
So look at all the links and linkages and see which ones you can cut out. Every time there's an exception, we add one more criteria, right? And that's why permitting and these things now take months and months and months, because there's so many things that have been added to take care of exceptions, and you have to go through
Yeah.
that whole thing. And it's an absolute nightmare, as you probably know, in construction, right? In
Right.
construction, we don't have a doing constraint. We can get a house built. I was part of a team that broke the world record for Habitat for Humanity, building a 3-bedroom house in 3 hours and 41 minutes.
Mhm.
And this was in the 1990s, right? You can 3D print a house today. Why is it still taking 6 months, 8 months, 12 months? Because of all the permitting and all of that stuff, right?
Right.
So that was an example of how I took the idea from the goal, weakest link, find it, focusing on until the weakest link moves, to say I can expand that using the chain analogy for other goals that I might want to achieve.
Yeah. Excellent. So you introduced me in our prep call to the idea of a digital twin, and you were very specific that it's not just your data in a big database. You described it as more like a flight simulator. Help our audience understand what is a real digital twin and why does that distinction matter so much?
So there's 3 types of digital twins that people talk about. The first one is literally just a database where the information has been converted from analog into digital, right? So imagine you're a construction company and you've been around for 30 years and you probably have hundreds of quotations that you've prepared, but they're all in analog form, right? So you can build a digital twin by reading in that analog data, put it in electronic digital format, and now suddenly it's available to analyze. The second type of digital twin would be a static model. So imagine an Excel model, right? Where every worksheet in that Excel model contains a different proposal with data, right? And you ask it, tell me, what is the quote that we give to projects that fall within the scope? And it can look at all the hundreds and find that to you. The problem with these static models is they have to use averages, and they can't fully consider what I call VUCA conditions: variability, uncertainty, complexity, constraints, and ambiguity. In order to fully consider that, the only version is you have to build a dynamic digital twin, which is similar to a flight simulator, where you can expose it to real world conditions with front up winds, right, and problems with pilot error, etc., and see how they will perform. So that's what we do in project environment. You have your plan that might be an MS Project or Primavera, which is a digital model of your project, right? And you can use it to identify the critical path to say, how long will it take me to complete this? But each step on that critical path, it's based on a duration that somebody estimated. But in reality, it can be shorter or longer. So to turn that static plan into a digital model, we have to be able to add the variability, press the play button, run thousands of simulations, and see the range of outcomes that you're going to get. And then you can go back and say, what if we change one of the rules? So kind of like a simulator that says, if we just follow the plan as it is now, are we going to get to the destination in time, on time, with the level of fuel that we have? Oh no, we're going to crash because we're not carrying enough fuel. Well, how much fuel should I keep so I don't have too much or too little? So I can come up with different options, scenarios, and I can run all of those scenarios through my flight simulator and say, oh, this is the best option. Not generally, but specifically, right now, this is the best option. We can do the same for projects. So a digital twin of a project environment is not a digital twin that's a database or digital twin of a piece of equipment. It's a digital twin of the whole system, like a traffic system. And we
Mhm.
can use that for a couple of ways, right? I can use it to make more reliable commitments under real world conditions. I can also use it to generate data. They call it synthetic data that AI can use to train. So imagine if
Okay.
I'm starting to go into a new business, quoting a new type of commercial building, right? I've never done it. So I have no data for the AI to train on. I can
Mhm.
actually build a dynamic model and run the simulation and generate data and use the data to train. And it's almost like thinking about chess, where you have the AI that's trying to learn how to play chess and how to win at chess. But unless it has a simulation model where it can test it and see the impact, it won't learn. So AI and digital twins always go hand in hand. AI can generate synthetic data, can show the impact, and can also compare once the AI is trained to say, let's compare the AI rules with my current rules and see which one gives me the best outcome in real world conditions.
Yeah, that is, to me, that's a fascinating concept. So in our prep conversation, you walked me through the chess analogy, which you just brought up, and I think that makes total sense. But learning the rules to win is an order of magnitude harder. How does that map into how Goldrat Research Labs approaches AI for business decision making? And I think you kind of touched at that on your last answer here.
Yeah. So if you again using the chess analogy, is the rules to play chess is not complicated, right? You can teach a kid. The same with the rules to be in construction, right? It can be overwhelming for a novice, but quickly they figure out this is how it works, right? That's the
Hmm.
rules to play the game. The rules to win the game is much harder to figure out for two reasons. One is there's many options. Like with chess, there's many ways that I can prepare a quotation. There's many ways that I can build a plan. There's many ways that I can execute the plan in terms of how do I allocate resources. So just the fact that there are many options already makes it complicated. The second part is normally the best option from a system perspective can be very counterintuitive. Like one in projects, imagine you're working on 10 construction projects and all of them are running late. And you're asking me for my advice. And I say, Rick, in order to finish projects faster, you have to start them later. Never do more than 3 at a time and only start the fourth one once you've finished one. And you
Hmm.
go, what about the other ones that's waiting in backlog? I say, I can show you with a simulation that if you did this thing, which is very counterintuitive, you'll actually not just finish the first projects faster, but you'll finish all the projects faster. You'll do it at a lower cost and with less mistakes. And that's where the digital twin comes in. Is often the impact is so counterintuitive that we actually need a digital twin to show us that.
Yeah, show us more of the mistakes that we make.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, and if we have different opinions about what's the best way, right? You can say let's test both of them under real world conditions and see
Yeah,
which one is really better.
yeah, absolutely. So you shared a case study from a major resort development project here in your hometown of Vegas here. A $250 million project, $200,000 a day in delay costs. The decision maker saved $100,000 negotiating with a contractor, and it cost him $2 million in delays.
Yeah.
How do you use that kind of story to get leadership teams to buy in to your simulation and what the simulation is actually telling them?
Sure. So the first thing is to recognize from a decision making point of view that when somebody is delaying a decision, it can be that they are waiting for all the information. Can be. That's a good reason to
Hmm.
procrastinate, to say, I don't have all the information. But you get to a point where you recognize you'll never have all the information and you have to make a decision, right? So why would you then not make a decision? And it's normally related to fear, both fear of
Hmm.
failure. What if I make the wrong decision? Fear of success. What if I make the right decision? What will happen then? So you can overcome that with a digital twin where you can try out your options and get fast feedback. But another technique to prevent procrastination is to quantify the cost of a day delay, right? So that anybody that's making a decision, they must not only fear the consequences of their decision, they must have an equivalent fear of the cost of not making a decision, right? So in that project that you've mentioned, this is something that all your listeners and viewers can do. This project, $250 million over 4 years. So you divide $250 million by the 4 years with around, 300 days of actual work time. And what you come up with is a number of about $200,000 a day, right? That's the actual cost of a day delay. Then you say, okay, you are on the critical path, right? So any day that you are delaying a decision, it's going to cost us this. And the example I shared with you is somebody that said they had to make a decision about appointing an architect. They originally asked for 5 days, and it ended up taking them 15 days. And the justification of that additional 10 days was it was to negotiate a better price. And they felt very good about it because they were able to reduce the cost from $300,000 to $200,000 until I reminded them, by the way, you just cost the project $2 million. So you've saved 100,000, but you cost the project 2 million. It's now going to take 10 days later. And he
Mm-hmm.
said, well, but I'll catch it up. I said, if you could have catch it up, you would have, right?
Right,
If there was a
right,
way to do it 10 days faster, you should have done that.
right.
Now you are having to use that benefit just to recover to where you were originally before the
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a useful reference. Digital twins help us to make better, faster decisions, but also really quantifying the cost of a day delay is also very useful to overcome that fear that causes procrastination.
Yeah, absolutely. Expensive lesson for that contractor.
Yes.
So you mentioned that you look at two failure modes: using the wrong rules and failing to comply with your own rules.
Yes.
That's a fascinating framing. So, in your experience, which of those two problems is more common and more damaging?
So when we think about measuring a system, we have two common types of measurements. They call them lag and lead measurements, right? Lag measurement is, are you achieving the goal? So on a construction project, did you make the money that you expected? Lead measurements would be, were resources available when needed? Did we complete every task on time? Right? Those are lead measurements. They are kind of giving an idea of whether you are moving, making progress in the right direction. But the third type of measurement I see almost nobody uses, and it's at least equally important to the other two, which is compliance metrics. That said, we agreed to follow these rules. Now, if I don't get the outcome I want, how do I know that it's because I'm not using the right rules? Or is it because people just didn't follow the rules that we agreed upon? If
Mm-hmm.
I'm not measuring compliance, I would never have an idea. I give you an example. A huge mining company, they were implementing SAP as an IT system, and they were very strict about only using standard modules, right? No enhancements or customization. They wanted to get it implemented as fast as possible. The only exception was maintenance. Somebody convinced them that SAP didn't have the maintenance capabilities in their maintenance module, and they justified buying a very advanced maintenance module, a third-party software that hooked on. A year after, I was asked to go and do an audit. And the basic idea is this new maintenance module would look at all the factors and then indicate how many spare parts you needed for every piece of equipment. And it was supposed to be better than SAP, which was turned out not to be true. But even if it was, when I looked at the compliance level, what percentage of the time were the buyers actually following the recommendation from this new fancy software? It was 30%, right? So now you don't know. Are we carrying too much or too little spare parts because we're using the wrong rules? Or is it just because people didn't comply with the rules?
Yes. So, what does erratic decision making cost a business in measurable terms? Can you put a number on it?
I think erratic, it comes to how you define erratic, right? To me, erratic means that it's not consistent, right? It's like I have three estimators, and each one of them are making decisions on a different basis, right? So
Right.
the cost of that would be to say, probably each of these estimators have got more experience in at least one type of project, right? How would I quantify the cost of the erratic decisions? I would try to see what was the avoidable delays. So if we could use the best one to always make that the type of decision, what would have been a benefit from that? And we've
Mm-hmm.
done that before, right? It's not in construction, but in high tech with Cisco systems. So their chief architects basically designed the IT networks, right? Almost like a construction plan, but they designed the IT networks of how to get Wi-Fi, etc. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, all the account managers want to get access to the best designers, right? Because most likely they will be reliable and you'll make money on that project. If you have novice designers, you'll either won't make money, you'll lose money, or it will be a suboptimal design that might not work. So we were
Mm-hmm.
comparing, how does the best make the decision? And we used AI to train to learn how the best make the decision. And then we showed the decision that the novices were making and showed the gap. How much faster, better, more profitable could the project have been if you could always get the best person to make that decision, or always get the AI? So
Mm-hmm.
that to me is one way of quantifying the cost of erratic decision making.
Sure. Absolutely. That's a great way to term that. Gold Rat Research Lab sits at the intersection of systems thinking, AI, and what you call agent based simulation. For a CEO or COO, who hasn't been exposed to this world, what's the entry point? What's the problem they're already feeling that tells them they might need what you offer?
So just one of two things. Either they want to do better and maybe even much better, or they have to do better or much better, right? So what a digital twin can help you do is to quantify how much better you can do with what you've got. And secondly, how best to do better. What are the minimum changes, the lowest cost, lowest risk, simplest, fastest changes that you can make that will allow your system to do better or even much better? So that's
Hmm.
essentially the problem that we're solving with digital twins is a CEO or business owner either having to do better because his business is in crisis or her business is in crisis, or they might already be the best, but they want to do even better. And they have options and they want to test what option would be best for them, not generally, but best for them. And that's a way of using it to test it with a combination of AI and digital twins.
Yeah. So following up on that, there are most likely still industries that are making the decisions the same way they did 20 years ago. So what industries are at most risk from sticking with that approach and not moving forward with the better processes that you're speaking of?
I mean, most obvious ones is wherever there's no monopoly, right? If you're a monopoly, you don't care, right?
Mm,
Customers only have one option, right?
right.
But if you're not a monopoly, if you're in a highly competitive market, and that market is either very time sensitive or price sensitive, then you want to be able to check, right? Is the current way of doing things, is that causing us to take much longer, or is it causing us to have to charge much more than what we've ever charged? Right.
Hmm.
I gave an example this morning. Uh, we were part of a recent study that looked at what is the average labor rate, fully absorbed labor rate in the US for a typical worker, and it's about $46. If you take a humanoid robot like the ones that Tesla is building, that's planning to sell for around $25,000 to $30,000, and you depreciate it over just 3 years, you assume it will have a lifespan of only 3 years, and you add in all the energy costs during that 3 years, right? The average cost is $2 an hour, right? Now, if you are not going to be exploiting that, your competitor will. And that will give them a massive speed and price advantage. So I think, 20 years ago, if you took a few years to adopt the technology, the consequences were not that bad. Now it can be catastrophic.
Especially when you have stakeholders in that business and they are always looking at the way to gain more from their investment.
Absolutely. And going back to where we started with what's the goal? Do you want to do more? Do you want to do it faster, better, cheaper, simpler? As a business owner today, you have to ask that question and say, what is it that will give us a competitive advantage? If we could just do more with what we've got, do it faster, better, cheaper, simpler, how can AI and robotics help me do that? And what they will
Hmm.
discover is in almost every case, the bottleneck is going to be a human. You can think about like Elon Musk, I heard use this example the other day. He said, imagine having a whole floor of underwriters that were doing statistical calculations to know what is the premium that you should be quoted on for a life policy, right? Now
Hmm.
imagine you can build an Excel spreadsheet that does all the calculations that were previously done by human beings, right? It can do all of those calculations in a second. But now imagine you introduce just one of the fields on that Excel has to be populated or calculated by a human. That's going to be the bottleneck,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
So I suspect that those companies that adopt AI and robots, faster than their competitors are going to have a huge competitive advantage. It's going to be very difficult to compete with them.
So this next question kind of plays into that. Looking ahead, where do you see the intersection of AI and simulation-based decision making going in the next 3 to 5 years? Is there a capability that's coming that most businesses are completely unprepared for?
I think digital twins and simulation is where AI was maybe 5 years ago. So there's a small group that were early adopters that could see not just the potential that AI can deliver, but started to invest in it, right? Today, AI is common everywhere. Digital twins is in the same level. Is there's a few early adopters that realize that AI can't go by itself. AI needs simulation to generate data, to train on, and to test the new rules that AI comes from, right? It's like, I can't ask AI to learn to play chess if I didn't give it a simulation engine of chess,
Mhm.
right? So I need both of them. So that is my prediction, is that late last year, I was going on a plant tour in Nvidia's head office, and just by accident we bumped into Nvidia's CEO Jensen Huang,
Mhm.
and I was able to ask him a question. He's also a big fan of theory of constraints and applies that thinking, to essentially grow in an unconstrained world, as being proactive and not allowing any resource to become a constraint. But I asked him, Jensen, do you think that AI can solve any problem? Of all the problems that we face by humanity, medical issues, affordable housing, all of these type of things, right? And his answer was without a blink. He said, if we can simulate it, AI can solve it. Right? It's like the protein folding that you see DeepMind has solved, right? They had to build a simulation engine and AI to use that simulation to try out different options and see which ones work and which one doesn't. So I think, as a business owner, as a CEO, senior executive, the faster you get into understanding digital twins and simulation, the better it will be for you. Because
Mhm.
AI is a black box. It's not like a simple heuristic, like if you were managing inventory with a min-max rule. I can kind of explain to you how a min-max rule works, right? You're going to order up to the maximum level, you wait until it drops to a minimum, and then they'll place an order back up to max. So you can
Mhm.
kind of predict how that rule will make a decision. But if I got AI to look at all your past data and I say, can AI come up with a better way of managing your inventory? And it says, yes, it can. How do I know it's really better?
Mhm.
Right?
Right.
This is the problem, is we don't know how it works inside. And the way to see how it works is to be able to use it with a simulator, because on a simulator, you can see how it's placing orders, right? You can create a scenario in the future and said, what if we sold 20%, 50%, 100% more? Let me see how this AI will cope with that. But I need a simulation or digital twin for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very exciting. Last question. I always like to end here. If someone's listening to this as a founder or an operations leader who's been burned by a bad decision, one where they had the data but still got it wrong, what's the one thing you'd want them to take away from our conversation here today?
I think the first part is just giving themselves some credit, right? Is a very important differentiation that we should make, is a bad decision can have a good outcome and a good decision can have a bad outcome. A simple one that everybody can associate. Imagine you've had a couple of drinks at a restaurant with your partner and you deciding to drive home, right? Really bad decision, but you could arrive home safely. And now you learned a long lesson that I can get away with this, right? At the same time, you could also make a good decision to not drive and then, take a Uber, and maybe the Uber overcharges you or something. It's like a bad outcome, right? So it's making sure that when you say it was a bad decision, don't confuse bad decision with bad outcome. Think about the decision as a bet that you're making. A really
Hmm.
bad decision has a small upside if it actually works and a big downside if it doesn't.
Yes. Well, Alan, that was genuinely extraordinary. Just really the way that you explained this makes it seem like this next step is just intuitive, not having to create the situation where this is something that is applicable. It just seems like this is intuitively the next step to make these programs and to make these agents work much better than they currently do at this stage.
And not to be scared, right? As to view it as a technology that can be extremely helpful, and just try it, right? Just start. I mean, I recently, practicing what I preach, I had software that I developed to help you make better decisions called Harmony Decision Maker. It took me over 7 years to develop all the versions. There's a web app, a mobile app, for iOS, for Android. I've spent close to $1 million on this, but I was getting stuck in this trap where the skilled developers had become the bottleneck. And as soon as somebody offers them a bit more money, they leave. New developer comes in, it's complex code. It takes them a couple of months, and in those months, they're creating more bugs than what they're fixing, right? And I just got into this horrible, vicious cycle of not being able to develop any new functionality until I just got tired. And over essentially a weekend, I rebuilt the whole application from scratch by myself. Took me 2 weeks to refine it. The listeners and viewers can go to harmonydecide.com, and this is a app that has embedded in it ChatGPT, and you can use it in two ways. Either AI do it with me, which means I'm making the decision, I'm analyzing every step, and it's giving me feedback because we all have biases and blind spots, or I can just give it the problem I'm facing or the opportunity, and it will do the whole analysis for me, and I can check its work and update it, right? Now, all of that I developed in basically 2 weeks. But if I didn't start, I was convinced, and I've been doing this for a long time. I was convinced my
Mm.
excuse was, listen, this software is way too complicated. Agents can't do this. Yes, they can develop simple little apps on a mobile phone, but this software is
Mhm.
so complex, it can't do it. Now, it would never have taken me 2 weeks if I didn't invest that 7 years, because that helped me to really know exactly what I want and what I don't want and how I want everything to work, right? And
Mhm.
that intuition and experience I could translate into much clearer, precise prompts to develop the software exactly like I want it to work. It's starting. Just have the courage to start and play and enjoy it again. I mean, I'm like literally like a kid in a candy shop now. I'm so productive because these tools are great. And I'm writing a new book about it called From Competitor to Collaborator to Co-Creator, which basically explains my own journey with AI. Going back to where our story started here, I realized, oh my gosh, when it comes to decision making, I have a competitor that will just keep getting better. I can never compete with it. That's
Mhm.
devastating until you realize, what if I'm collaborated with it, right?
And
And then the
used it.
final
Yeah.
step is, what if we can co-work so we can co-create? My
Mhm.
job is just to say, what am I passionate about? Who do I want to help? And then working with the AI to say, this is the problem I want them to help solve.
Great stuff. Again, thank you, Dr. Alan Barnard. That was a wonderful addition to this podcast series, and I think everybody that looks at this is going to be a bit blown away by it. So, everybody, keep an eye out for it. And again, Dr. Barnard, thank you for your time today.
You are so welcome. Thank you, Rick, for the opportunity.
Absolutely.